Okay, so after going through the 5 areas of the permit that we just talked about, what does that all mean to a project? That's the number one question I get asked is, all right, so we got this new permit, but what does it mean to me as a contractor, as an LRP, as a QSP? What do I need to charge as a QSP? How do my SWIPs change? What does it involve? But it almost invariably goes to dollars and cents. And that's really where it kind of, the rubber meets the road here. So let's talk through some of this here and put some of what we learned together, and again in a side-by-side comparison. So looking at the inspection program on a side-by-side comparison, we did this earlier, but now let's put some numbers to it. And so under the 09 permit, here's the types of inspections we might have on a like a risk level 2 project. So we would have REAPs. And how many REAPs do you have a year? Well, it depends what year. Like this year we got a lot of rain. And that may or may have not affect the REAPs. Lots of times a lot of little events is what triggers lots of REAPs. We tended to have long events, so that meant less REAPs. But we tend to estimate, about 3 REAPs per wet month. And that's, probably a conservative number, but 21 REAPs is what we tend to estimate. And then as far as routine QSP inspections, we would typically see, okay, there's 5 dry months. So using a number that works out well to convert months to weeks, we do 4.3 inspections we estimate per month. And then during the wet months, we also have the weekly inspections. So we do that at 4.3. But now we add in some pre-storm, during storm, and post-storm inspections, keeping in mind that the weekly and the pre-storm or the weekly and the post-storm can often be one and the same inspections. So that's why, I only have like 1 pre-storm and 1 post-storm, because that's maybe the one that couldn't coincide with a weekly inspection. And then roughly 6 during storm inspections. Now there's months that have much more, but this is an average, and there's months that have much less. So we have found these numbers in our estimating to work pretty good, and to be fairly safe numbers, but yet fairly realistic. Now in the 2022 permit, what does it look like? Well, during the dry months, pretty much the same. And during the wet months, pretty much the same, except that QSP is going to need to go out more often. And of course, we're assuming here that the QSP is doing all the work anyway, so we're not factoring in a delegated inspector. But I'm thinking that maybe twice a month that QSP will need to go out and do a NAL exceedance inspection. Now, I'm also assuming that maybe we could get a couple that fall under the weeklies too. So I'm trying to factor some of that in. But something that shows up in the 2022 inspection program that doesn't show up in the 2009 inspection program is the QSD portion of it. And so we have a startup project QSD inspection. We have the 2 semi-annual inspections, and then we have 4 NAL exceedance inspections. And I would say that 4 NAL exceedance inspections is for a site that is probably behaving pretty good. If we have a site that has compliance issues, there's going to be a whole lot more that's going to be needed. So this is for a site that has fairly decent control over it. Remember, NAL exceedances is going to be a whole lot easier to trigger because it's just going to take 1 excursion of 250 NTUs or 1 excursion of 8.5 pH, and the QSP and the QSD are out there. Okay, and there's no REAPs involved with the 2022. And of course, this is the new area for the 2022. All right, so when we put the dollars and cents together for risk level 1 and risk level 2, and essentially risk level 3 is pretty much similar to risk level 2, what would our costs be? Now, there's a lot of conditions here, a lot of caveats. Okay, there's a lot of assumptions being made, like how far away is the project? You know, I think we're like most QSP inspectors that, close projects have a whole lot lower pricing than far away projects. But where is the project located is part of it. What risk level is it? Are we doing the QSPs performing all the inspections, or are we doing oversight? And so when we put all of those together and try to keep it apples to apples comparison, what I have found is that risk level 1, where the QSP does all of the inspections, it's a slight increase, almost $2,000 increase, not a huge increase, primarily because the QSP is already doing it all out there. And so all of those pre-storms, it's no different. But it's in the oversight where we're using an oversight person, we could have, a project costing $11,000 or a little more than $11,000. But now with the additional QSP, QSD involvement, that bumps the project up to $21,000. So almost a $10,000 increase for that risk level 1 QSP oversight. And when I say QSP oversight, I'm talking about our approach to doing it. In other words, we're using a delegated inspector. The QSD is out there for each of these when triggered. Now, risk level 2, it's a little bit higher because the number one reason is no NAL exceedances for risk level 1, right? They're not sampling. Now we got NAL exceedances for risk level 2 and for risk level 3. Really, the pricing would be about the same for risk level 3. So we're going to see a $6,000 increase for where the QSP is doing all of the inspections. And we're going to see again, about a $10,000, a little more than what we would see for risk level 1, but about a $10,000 increase for where we're using delegated inspectors. So to summarize, how much more is the inspection program? Again, there's a lot of site-specific things that could go into this, but roughly $2,000 to $11,000 would be our range. $2,000 to $11,000 increased in the 2009 program. Now, I mentioned earlier there is one permitting scenario that I think might actually benefit from the newer permit, and that's LUP type 1. So LUP type 1s that are having to do daily inspections and are paying for daily inspections, actually doing them by the new monitoring requirements of only needing to do weekly and during storm inspections, I think they would see a cost reduction in the new permit. I didn't estimate it, but I think they probably will. Of course, they still have to have QSDs involved there, but I still think they'll see overall a cost reduction. But that's just monitoring. What about all the other new stuff? Now, this is really hard to estimate. There will certainly be a cost impact, certainly. But a lot of it depends on where is your project? Do TMDLs apply? Don't apply? Do certain of these BMP scenarios apply, like dewatering? Maybe it applies, maybe it doesn't apply. But let's look at some of these. How about the impact to the cost of preparing SWIPs? What do I think will be the impact? I estimated that at about a 5 to 10% cost increase between the old permit and new permit, just because there are new BMPs that we have to address. I need to then be doing some checks to see whether TMDLs apply or not apply. So there's some additional QSD activities that need to go into preparing a SWIP that we didn't have to do under the old permit. Not huge, but still 5 to 10% probably impact on the cost. Impact on permitting costs. What do we mean by that? Well, I'm not talking about the fees. I'm talking about the preparing a notice of intent. More weighted is the new requirements for changes of information that we talked about at the beginning of today, and the new requirements for notice of terminations, the additional documentation that's required with that, the QSP actually having to go out and do that final NOT inspection. So I'm thinking a 25 to 50% increase on the cost of all those activities, NOIs, COIs, NOTs. Training costs. I think there will be an impact to training. One is when we use delegated inspectors, we now have this two-tiered approach that we're going to have to teach on. And the construction general permit team is going to get into the mix. They're going to actually tell us what we need to teach or use to teach them with. So they're going to give us a curriculum or an outline at least. And we're going to have some expectations as far as what we're going to teach. And I'm thinking that's going to involve quite a bit more time than we have historically spent on these delegated inspectors. So again, I'm thinking about a 25 to 50% increase in training costs. Dewatering, as you heard earlier, that's potentially going to be a nightmare. And I said $5,000 to $25,000 cost. After the last training I gave, I'm starting to think it actually potentially could be much higher. But conservatively, you know, some of this could potentially be quite easy to do. But some of it's going to be very expensive and very painful to do. So I would say that's on the low side, but $5,000 to $25,000. Topsoil management, $2,000 to $10,000 to be moving around your topsoil, keeping it covered, keeping it stored, keeping it safe, managing it, $2,000 to $10,000. Additional engineering. If you remember, I pointed out in the sediment control and the erosion control, there's some additional engineering requirements for slopes and hydraulic calculations and BMP compliance demonstrations. I think some additional engineering is going to be required, and I'm estimating $5,000 to $10,000 for that. For that LRPs are going to have to pay. Surface water buffers, a brand new BMP we talked about. A lot of it depends on the logistics of the site. Some of it might be we just throw up some ESA fencing and it's very cheap. But there will be other areas where we're having to do more protection, or we're having to do the offsetting of it. In other words, we can't meet 50 feet, so we got to have additional BMPs, and we got to demonstrate compliance using Russell 2. So I'm guesstimating between $5,000 and $25,000 for that. Additional BMPs for demolition, $2,000 to $5,000. I've been here, and it probably depends on the scale of demolition. Certainly, it could be much more. And then TMDL compliance, that's the wild card. That could be, well, I say $5. That's it probably should be $5,000. That's a typo. It's probably more than $5. But $50,000 or more, it certainly could be quite expensive in certain circumstances, especially I'm thinking in the LA area. It could get really expensive when you get some of that soil screening that needs to be done. It could get quite expensive. So what does it mean? How much more to cost to comply with the 2022 CGP? When we put it all together and giving some variations on ranges, I would say $28,000 to $138,000 extra dollars. Now, is that per year? Well, it could be. It could also be per project. If you have a year-long project, then it's both, right? It's not necessarily per year. Some of those items are per year, but nonetheless, I think we're looking at a minimum cost impact to a project of in that range of $28,000 to $138,000. So, all right. Well, that brings us to the end, and wow, we got 4 minutes to spare before 3 o'clock. So, open up for questions. Anybody have questions that you want to talk about? In fact, let me stop the recording and